Welcome everyone again to Thursdays with Troy. As always, I'm Troy Lambert, mystery author, editor, super plotterer, and your host. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Zara Altair. Zara writes historical fiction, the Argolicus mysteries,
Argolicus.
where politics and murder collide, which I absolutely love. In Italy, a mystery lover since childhood, she has written about writing for a number of publications, including Pro Writing Aid and International Thriller Writer, another one of my favorite places. And she is also a member of Sisters in Crime. And if you are a female and you write crime, you should be a member of Sisters in Crime as well. She lives in Beaverton, Oregon, where she reads, walks among trees, and shares space with Coda the cat. Her online course, Write a Killer Mystery, guides writers from story idea to the end. And we'll talk about that as well. So welcome, Zara.
Hi. I just want to put a little footnote to Sisters in Crime. Everybody, yes. All genders are welcome. We have men in our group. So
fantastic. That is something to definitely keep in mind.
Yeah.
And thanks for clarifying that. I do appreciate that. So today we're going to talk about historical fiction. Historical fiction is always kind of a hot genre. It's always up there. Usually there's a subgenre involved, like adding the element of mystery. And then you have a real winning combination because you have the power of historical along with, mystery, which is also always a really great selling category. However, when it comes to historical fiction, the facts are kind of as important as the fiction at times. And your readers might know a lot, even more than you do, about the era you're writing about. So keeping your ideas organized and accurate is super important. So let's talk about that for a minute. Why historical fiction? What draws you to that genre?
It just all sort of happened organically. That's kind of how everything happens in my life. And I was on the phone with my daughter who had been to school in Italy twice, and she was like, "Mommy, the one city you should visit is Ravenna." And then she went into this long thing about Theodoric and then crossing the Danube and coming into Italy and becoming king and da-da. And I was like, wow, I wonder what it was like to live there. And that's essentially how it started, a phone conversation.
Wow.
And I've always been interested in history, but not particularly the history of Italy. And so there were years of catch-up work, connecting with professors, reading, going to Ravenna, interviewing professors at the Università di Bologna, Ravenna, and they were so helpful. So one thing I want to encourage, if anyone who's thinking about writing historical fiction, is do not be afraid to reach out to professors, because amazingly enough, they're just absolutely thrilled that someone is actually writing fiction and is interested enough in their obscure period of time. So of all the people I've contacted over the years, everybody has been so helpful with specific little issues, or telling me nobody knows, so you can kind of make it up. And I've only had one person not answer me.
People love to talk about the things that they're passionate about. So this is a really good point to make. With people doing historical fiction, is there's a certain element of research that you can do on Google and in your library and things like that. But if you can actually talk to people who teach this, who are really immersed in it, they can, and if you can get them to look at your work, especially, it makes a really big difference. Now, as a mystery lover myself, I love adding mystery to all kinds of things. And I love that you're adding that element to historical fiction. So do you fictionalize actual events or put fictional events in the historical setting?
It's pretty much putting fictional events in historical setting. However, my protagonist actually was a real person, but nobody knows very much about him. He was mentioned 9 times in Cassiodorus Varii. I mean, you get to make up their personalities because there's not very much information about the actual individuals.
Right. So you've got a lot of leeway to play
There's
with
lots
these.
of there's lots of leeway. What I find is in doing research is there's the big research, which is, you know, what happened in this time period and who was doing what and what were the laws and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, when I get into a story, I'm like, oops, I know nothing about city politics. And so I found someone in Toronto who specialized in that and really helped me figure out the structure. And also, it was one of those areas where people don't know exactly what was going on. Then he was one of the ones who said, you know, well, we don't know for sure, so you can make it up however you want to make it happen in your story. But he gave me a general idea. And so I find with each story, I come up against particulars that I need to research. I also think, just for anybody who's considering writing historical fiction, it is that you really get specific with your time. So say you're writing a Western, is it 1845 or 1865? Because there's this Civil War that happens.
There's a huge difference.
Yeah. And so be as specific as possible with your year, because it's going to help you narrow down your research and you won't be using information that doesn't apply to that particular time.
Right. So before we dive into that plotter file, which is what we're going to do next, as you're doing that, what I would call the small research. So you do the big research, you plan the novel, then as you're drafting, do you do that research as you go, or do you wait until the draft is done and go back and fill in the blanks?
I usually do it as I go, and you'll see that I'm kind of organic about everything, even though it looks like it's structured. One of the things, especially with historical novels, is the more details you have, the more you get to use specific details and pull them out and plunk them into your story. And if you don't know those specific details, you can't plunk them in. So I like to get those specifics kind of in my head, at least as I'm writing.
Okay. Good. All right. So let's look at your plotter file. I have it open here. I have it kind of in the larger overall view so people can see you've got quite a few chapters here. You've got, you know, your main plot, a subplot, some of the chapters itself. So tell me a little bit about your process. Like, where do you start? Where do you begin when you open up a plotter file?
Okay, when I open up a plotter file to start a new story, I have a general idea of the story. For instance, with this particular story, I have a family, a woman who is murdered. She's the murder victim. And then I have her family, her husband, her brother-in-law, her son. And I know a lot about the family. That's just how it starts. And I'm going to say right now, I don't know who did it yet. And that's kind of hanging me up with where I'm going to go, because I do like to know the ending before I get too far into the story.
So would you say that you start with characters then? You start with the characters. Oh, yeah. Hey, we'll just take that opportunity to look at your character files that you have here and kind of the template. So do you use, you see kind of uses some emotional responses here. You gather pictures. Do you gather those pictures before you start? You kind of have an idea of what the person looks like? Or do you find out what they look like as you write?
I really start with characters. So I really want to know what they look like, at least in my head, because it helps me visualize them as I'm writing. That's just how I work. I like to to be looking at that character, as it were, in my head while I'm writing. I know who that person is. So visualizing the characters really helps me see them as I write. I have to go into the scene to write my story.
Right. Okay, no, that's good. So, oh, and you have other pictures down here. That's good, because I wanted to actually show people that you can add more pictures to the notes.
Yes, you
And
can.
and so do you make a lot of notes when you start to kind of plan out your characters? Do you add to those as you go? Do you develop
Oh,
the
yeah.
characters as you go? Okay. And you just continually update your character files.
Yes, correct.
Excellent. So you also, how deep do you go with your supporting characters? Do you go, let's take a look at one of those. So you have some fewer notes about those, but how deep do you go with all of them?
This character is in every one of the stories, and I just know her. So I don't really need to make a lot of notes about her, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's a good thing to know your characters that well.
You have to realize I've been living with some of these characters for years, and I just recently started using Plottr. So
Right. My main characters, I've been writing them forever, but I don't necessarily need a lot of notes on them because they're not new to me,
right.
Even though they're new to Plottr. So we've got our characters down. We kind of got a general idea where the story is going. Where do you go from there?
Okay, from there, go back to the timeline. From there, I go and I use my 40 chapter outline, which you see down below at Argalika's template.
Gotcha.
Okay, and you see all the chapters down below where it says chapters.
Right.
If you open up that top level, one of those cards on the top level, you'll see what's going to be happening in that chapter.
Right. So you have a description of what that's going to look like.
And if you hop out of that for a second.
Okay.
And then go to the second one and go to the scene below where it says Gregoria's. This is the internal goal. So I have an idea of what the actual chapter is going to cover. This is going to be an internal goal, and he was loaned some bodyguards in another story, and in this one he's going to try and give the bodyguards back, and they don't want to go. So we're going to deal with that. That's what's going to happen with the internal goal in this chapter.
Gotcha. Okay. So basically then you have this 40 chapter. Is this something you set up that kind of follows a template, or how did you come up with that?
Long ago with the Write, Publish, Repeat guys. So they had a development editor. Her name is Bonnie, and she came up with this 40 chapter outline, and I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. But I took her 40 chapter outline and modified it for a traditional mystery with a detective.
Kind of a hybrid between a couple different templates. And that's interesting. It's a very detailed version. So I would say that you're a very plot driven, but also pretty heavy plotter before you get started. How long does it take you to develop a plot like this, and what does that process look like for you?
However long it takes is how long it takes. And then, because I have this guideline template.
So what does that process look like for you? That process of you're sitting down, you've got your characters in mind, you've got this template in front of you. Like, what do you do? What does that look like for you?
Okay, so then I look at the main character, our hero detective, as it were, and I go through and I try to figure out what he's going to be doing in each of these situations. Click on, a chapter further on, like the brother. So he starts going out to interview suspects, and this chapter is all about that interview. And so in some ways it is, once again, character driven, because it's all about who he meets and what he can find out from these people, and also character development. What are the secrets that the person wants to hide? It may have nothing to do with the actual murder, but they may have secrets that they don't want anybody else to know. Part of my character development for mystery is for all of the suspects, I have secrets and then the lies they use to cover up their secrets.
And that's a good thing because that can create some great distractions for your detective. So tell me how, before we move on to one other thing, tell me, how do you balance the mystery and the history in your stories? Which one is paramount? Is the historical story, is that just the background and the mystery is paramount, or do you balance those two out? How do you decide?
Oh, the mystery is paramount. I'm a great believer in story, and I believe that's what my readers want. So the details, the setting, the culture, the everyday life, the food, all of those are the historical details, but the story's the thing.
Excellent. Of course, I don't want to assume anything now, but I do want to move on to settings for a moment, because I saw something really cool in your settings. So I just want to know about this floor plan that we're seeing on this first one, is if you did this yourself or if you have a friend that we all need to get to know.
Oh, no, I found that somewhere online.
No, so tell me about settings. Obviously, these are historical places. How deep do you go into the research of the historical places? Because obviously we see a nice little floor plan here, which is obviously extremely helpful. Is this an actual floor plan of this place, or is this a fictional one that kind of fits the era, the historical era?
This is a representation of generally what a townhouse, a domus, would be like. I mean, of course, they all had differences, but this is the general floor plan. And as people move around, I give the readers have a sense of where they are in the structure. If you go down to Olive Villa, so then now we're out in the country and we have a completely different framework and style for how that building is structured.
Oh, this is fantastic, because it shows your contrast of the two different settings and that you're still doing extensive research of both, which I think is really important for historical type of things. And so that's really good information.
One, when you do research for any novel, 80% of it is going to stay in your research files and 20% is probably going to show up in your story. But you don't know until you start writing what 20% is going to show up in your story. And the more details that you have, the better you can represent that historical framework without going into long explanations about, at this period in time, you know what I mean? Who wants to read that stuff? So my rule of thumb, especially when talking about politics or religion or something, religion was politics at this time. If my characters know it as a given, it is a given in the story. Right, exactly. So you want to really the more you can put those little tiny details in, the better you avoid the, Bob, stuff.
The long exposition. Yeah.
You don't even want short expositions. If you can help it. People are there for the story.
Mm-hmm.
They're
there to be entertained, not necessarily educated. If they accidentally get educated along the way, that's wonderful. But that's not what they're there for typically. So I know we've talked about this a little bit, but let's kind of put a finer point on what's your advice to someone who's just starting out writing historical fiction, thinks this might be really cool. I'm just starting out. Where should they start? What should they do?
Identify your year. I mean, it's really going to help you doing your research, because if you find something that happened in 1842, but your story's in 1833, doesn't count.
Yeah.
So another thing it is that, if you do go to another country to do your research, please be aware of cultural differences, because the more you're sensitive, the better response you're going to get from the people from whom you're asking information. So be as specific as possible. So say your story is located in Montana, or say your story is located in France, pick a town. Even if you're making up a town, pick a space. Is it in the mountains? Is it down below? Is it in the valley? Is it up from the seashore? Really know where your place is, know your time. And then when you get to your characters, you want to make sure that your characters fit the time period, because they're going to function in the culture of your time. So you want characters who fit in that time period.
Well, yeah, I think we could sum that up by saying, basically, you're going to have to do a lot of research to determine, is this the time? Well, and the other advice, from a entirely separate side of things, is you probably want to like that time period. You're going to spend a lot of time researching it. So don't, kind of like any other kind of writing, don't go after something that you don't like because you think it will sell. Because if you write something you don't like, we'll know. We'll know.
Yeah, your readers will know, because if you are writing about any historical period, believe me, the readers who are interested in that historical period probably know more than you do. That whatever your idea is that you want to put in your story is actually viable for that time period and place.
Right, exactly. Okay, well, I'll ask you some of the questions I ask every time is, what are the resources have helped get you where you are today? I mean, obviously you've done an extensive amount of research, actually traveled to the country, but what resources outside of that have helped you with your craft and things like that are something that you'd want to share with people?
Be in a writing group, but you're going to get feedback on your story. That's the part that counts, is your story. Mm-hmm. Your writing group may know nothing about your time period. That doesn't matter, but they're going to give you great feedback on your story. And if you're looking for historical research, there's an online research place called Academia. People are contributing to it every day, and all you have to do is focus in on your area of interest.
Now, the last thing, we'll come around to a couple last things. I know that you teach a course, or you have an online course about mysteries, and
yes,
then
about mysteries. Yes.
So tell people where they can find that. Basically, what's your website and things like that, and then we'll drop the link in the comments. And also, where else can people learn more about you? Where do you hang out online? Where can people stalk you? Things like that.
So, of course, there's my website, which is my name, ZaraAltair.com. And I'm here on Facebook. I have a profile, which could be anything or everything. And I have an author page on Facebook. Write a Killer Mystery is the name of the course. And pretty much it's all about writing. It takes you from story idea to the stages of editing.
Okay, excellent. Well, as you know, if you've watched these things before, there's always a question of the day. And I've decided to ask you a writerly question, but my qualification for this question is you can only give me a wrong answer. Because I know as writers, we get these questions asked frequently. So you can only give me a wrong answer. You cannot tell me the truth about the answer to this question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Where do you get your ideas?
Well, my cat comes up with some pretty good ideas.
That's very good. That's very good. My dog comes up with some great ideas too. Sometimes I enlist him to write blog posts that turn out better than mine. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, for Thursdays with Troy once again. Of course, we had a really fantastic time talking about historical fiction. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next Thursday for another Thursdays with Troy.
Thanks, Troy.
All right. Thank you, everyone.